Welcome back to the Deep Dive. This is where we take a whole stack of sources, articles, expert analysis, you name it, and distill it all down into what you really need to know. And today, wow, we are taking a massive journey back in time across the Atlantic in the 1600s to really unpack the dramatic and sometimes brutal beginnings of American settlement. Our mission is pretty clear. We want to get beyond that, the simple textbook summary.
Exactly.
And dissect the actual driving forces. I mean, that powerful mix of economic desperation, religious devotion, and just raw political ambition that fueled all of this. But it's more than just why people came. We really want to understand how those first seeds of self-government were planted, often completely by accident, across what would become the 13 colonies. And I want you to just, for a second, put yourself there. It's the 1600s, you're in England, maybe Scotland. What on earth would it take to get you to just abandon everything, get on a tiny ship, and risk your life crossing an ocean?
That is the question, isn't it? And that sense of just immense stakes is absolutely key to understanding this whole period.
It wasn't just for an adventure.
No, not at all. For many, it was the last, most desperate option. When you look at the records, the letters from that time, the core reasons for this huge shift of people across the Atlantic were, well, they were profound. You had people fleeing poverty, the economic push.
Okay.
Then you had others escaping intense religious persecution. And under all that, you have the ambition of European kings and queens wanting to grab new territory and resources. And just to set the stage, timeline-wise, you have Columbus in 1492, which is when Europeans become aware the continent exists.
Right, the first point of contacts.
But that awareness very quickly turns into a desire for permanent English colonization. It was a rapid cause and effect. As soon as they realized the potential for wealth, these high-risk, long-term settlement efforts began.
Okay, so let's start with the first big one. The first permanent English milestone, Jamestown, Virginia, 1607.
Right.
Because when we talk origins, this is really where the English experiment starts, and its whole reason for being was so different from what came later.
It couldn't be more different. Jamestown was an exercise in pure financial calculation. If you want to get its motivation, you have to completely throw out any ideas of religious idealism.
This wasn't about faith.
No, this was a business. The whole thing was organized by the Virginia Company, which was a joint stock company. It existed to make a profit for its investors.
So the people who came, these first settlers, they were there for one reason.
Money. Purely economic reasons. They were lured by this idea of finding gold, or at least some other valuable commodity to ship back home.
And the irony is just, it's so thick. They were so busy looking for gold that they almost all starved to death.
The starving time. It's a horrifying story. Only a tiny fraction of them survived those first couple of winters. It's a real testament to just how badly they mismanaged things.
So the gold plan was a total bust.
A complete failure. Their survival and the colony's survival didn't hinge on gold at all. It came down to a plant.
Tobacco. Yeah.
Specifically, a sweeter variety introduced by John Rolfe that became a massive craze back in Europe. Suddenly, they had their cash crop.
And that's where things get really interesting, because the success of tobacco completely changes the game. Jamestown goes from being this, risky little outpost to a real economic engine.
It does. But that success came with a huge price. The demand for tobacco created this insatiable hunger for two things: land and labor.
And tobacco is a rough crop on the soil, isn't it?
Absolutely. It's land intensive. It depletes the soil quickly. So the instant it became profitable, every settler wanted more land to plant more of it.
Which is what drives that initial system of indentured servitude.
Yes, where poor Europeans would work for years to pay off the cost of their passage. And then tragically, it leads directly to the introduction and the massive growth of the enslaved labor system over time. The entire economic model required immense human energy.
So you've got this colony built on greed, it survives by the skin of its teeth, and then finds this massive success with one crop. But all that chaos, it creates a need for rules, for order.
It does. And that need for local lawmaking leads directly to America's first elected assembly, the House of Burgesses in 1619.
And this is so important.
It's crucial. Now, we have to be clear, its membership was, very limited, almost exclusively to white men who owned land. So it was far from representative by our standards.
Of course.
But it set a precedent. It was a local attempt to create rules for survival, to figure out who gets what land, to levy taxes. They were basically importing the idea of parliament.
But applying it locally.
Exactly. Because London was 3,000 miles away. The king couldn't settle their daily arguments over a patch of tobacco land.
And that, right there, that's the key point. Representative government here wasn't born from some grand philosophical debate.
Not at all.
It was a practical, almost accidental solution driven by money and distance. They were just using the system they knew, the English Parliament, in a new place that desperately needed rules.
And that's the emerging tension. They see themselves as English subjects with the rights of Englishmen, but they're being forced to enact those rights themselves, far away from the king's direct control.
The House of Burgesses wasn't a declaration of independence.
No, it was a pragmatic adaptation of the English system to a colonial world.
Okay, so let's shift gears completely. We go from Jamestown, the pursuit of profit, to a totally different motivation just 13 years later. Let's talk about Plymouth, 1620.
A completely different world.
Here, the motivation is faith, not fortune.
The difference is striking. I mean, Jamestown's founders were looking at a balance sheet. The founders of Plymouth the Pilgrims were looking at their spiritual ledger.
They were separatists.
Yes, they wanted to break away entirely from the Church of England. They came to escape persecution and build a community where they could practice their faith exactly as they saw fit.
And this leads us to one of the most foundational documents in American history, which, kind of hilariously, was created because they were bad at sailing.
The Mayflower Compact. And you're right, the context is everything. They were supposed to land in Virginia.
Where they had a legal charter.
They did. But storms, bad navigation, something threw them way off course. They end up far to the north, off the coast of Cape Cod.
In territory where their charter meant nothing.
It was void. They had no legal authority to govern there. And they knew this was a problem. The other passengers, the ones who weren't pilgrims, they called them the strangers, were already saying they'd go their own way.
So chaos was brewing before they even got off the boat.
Exactly. So for their own survival, they realized they had to agree on a set of rules before anyone even set foot on land.
And that's the Mayflower Compact. It's not a constitution like we think of one today.
No, it's simpler. It was a voluntary written agreement. Everyone agreed to stick together and abide by a government they would create themselves.
That voluntary part is the radical idea, isn't it?
It's absolutely radical for the time. In Europe, power came from God down to the king, the divine right of kings. The compact says that authority flows upward from the people.
It's a covenant.
It's a covenant, a promise to create a civil body politic and make just and equal laws. This one act, born out of a legal problem, establishes the core idea of government by the people. It sets such a powerful precedent.
So we've got these two sort of contradictory founding moments. 1607, economic greed accidentally creates an elected assembly for landowners. In 1620, religious faith deliberately creates a written compact for self-government because they got lost. And these two ideas, profit and piety, are going to shape everything that comes next.
They absolutely define the development of all 13 colonies.
Okay, so let's zoom out. Because by the 1700s, we have 13 distinct colonies, and you can really see how the geography, the land itself, shaped their economies and even their politics.
The diversity is just remarkable, and you can really group them into 3 distinct regions. And in each one, the land determined everything.
Let's start up north, New England.
New England, the geography there was, frankly, brutal for farming. Cold climate, short growing season, and that famously rocky soil.
So large-scale farming was out of the question.
Mostly, yeah. It was subsistence farming, so their economy was forced to look elsewhere.
To the sea and to the forests.
Shipbuilding, fishing, trade. Exactly. Whaling, commerce.
Yeah.
But what's really fascinating is how the religious origins of the Pilgrims and Puritans shaped the politics there.
The church was the government, in a way.
In many ways, yes. Especially in a place like Massachusetts. They governed through covenant, and that led to this powerful tradition of direct democracy at the local level, the town meeting.
The famous town meeting.
Right. And you had to be a church member to participate. It gave citizens a very direct, very local role in their own governance. It created a society that was, highly conformist, but also very self-ruling.
Okay, let's move south into the middle colonies. This is kind of the geographical sweet spot.
It really was. They got called the breadbasket colonies for a reason.
Right.
They had a mild climate, fantastic soil, perfect for growing grains, wheat, barley, rye. They produced so much food, they were feeding a huge part of the continent.
And unlike New England, the middle colonies were incredibly diverse.
Very diverse, and that's key. They avoided that religious uniformity you saw up north, and a lot of that is thanks to people like William Penn.
And his holy experiment in Pennsylvania.
What a revolutionary idea that was. Penn founded Pennsylvania as a safe haven for Quakers, but also for other persecuted groups. He promoted real religious tolerance, civil liberties that were way ahead of their time.
And he knew he had to build a structure to protect that tolerance.
He did. He immediately set up an elected assembly, his frame of government. He had liberal land policies. So the middle colonies became this melting pot, and their political culture was just different. It was more secular, more focused on commerce and negotiation between all these different groups.
A huge contrast to the theocracy in Massachusetts.
A direct challenge to it, really.
And then we go south again, to the southern colonies, Maryland down to Georgia. And here, climate and soil create this one single dominant economic system.
It's all about the geography. The South had that perfect combination: a warm, humid climate and incredibly fertile coastal soil, ideal for growing labor-intensive cash crops all year round.
Tobacco, rice, indigo.
The big three. This geography was the perfect incubator for the plantation economy.
And we have to be explicit here. That economy depended on one thing.
Absolutely. We cannot overlook this. Because these crops needed huge amounts of land and constant back-breaking labor way more than one family could provide, the entire system came to depend on the growth of enslaved labor.
The whole society was built around it.
The entire political and social structure was built to support the plantation owners who controlled the land and the labor. It created this incredibly stratified society where power was held by a small landed elite. Geography didn't just decide what they grew, it codified a system of massive inequality.
So what's so fascinating is that no matter the reason for coming, whether it was gold in Virginia, tolerance in Pennsylvania, or God in Massachusetts, this push towards self-rule, towards being independent from London, it just seems inevitable across all three regions.
It was. And if we connect all the dots, the so what for you, the listener, becomes really clear. The rise of representative government in the colonies wasn't because of one single thing. It was like a perfect storm of four critical factors.
Okay, let's break them down.
First, and we've hit this a few times, is just the practical reality of distance from England. The communication lag was months long. London couldn't manage daily life across the ocean. The colonies had to do it themselves.
It's just common sense. Second, the need for political order.
Right. Whether you're arguing about tobacco fields in Jamestown or what road to build in a New England town, you need rules to survive in a new place. It's immediate.
Third, and this is important, this wasn't a brand new idea for them.
Not at all. They had a strong tradition of parliament. These colonists were English subjects. They were used to common law to the rights in documents like the Magna Carta. They expected to have a legislative body representing their interests. They just copied the model.
And finally, the power of having it in writing.
Yes, the existence of those written documents, things like the Mayflower Compact or Penn's frame of government, these weren't just rules. They formalized the whole idea of self-rule. They gave the colonists a legal, tangible piece of paper they could point to.
Which made it much harder for the king to later say they had no right to govern themselves.
They essentially built their own political legitimacy from the ground up, sometimes on purpose, sometimes by complete accident.
And that takes us right back to those two key years. 1607, the economic driver, the elected assembly, and 1620, the religious driver, the written compact. Two different paths that would eventually somehow have to merge into one country. So as a quick check for you, remember how much geography mattered. Can you recall which region was called the breadbasket and why? And maybe most importantly, remember the big idea from the Mayflower Compact. It wasn't just that they made rules, it was the radical idea that government comes from the consent of the people, not from a king thousands of miles away.
Which leaves us with a really interesting question for you to think about after this is over. You have this fundamental tension, right? You have Jamestown's ruthless pursuit of profit on one hand, and on the other, you have Plymouth and Pennsylvania's search for spiritual and political freedom. How did those totally different starting points, the economics of extraction versus the politics of tolerance, how did that complicate things down the road when these 13 very separate colonies had to actually try and become one unified country?
That's a great point. The seeds of later conflicts, maybe even the Civil War, you could argue they're planted right there in the soil alongside those first tobacco crops. Thank you for sharing your sources with us for this deep dive into the founding of the colonies.